unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, nestled in the heart of Idaho's mountain wilderness, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Discover the difference in their premium beans, meticulously roasted to capture the essence of the mountains. Now, listeners of our podcast can get an exclusive 10% discount. Just use the promo code CREATIVITY at checkout. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity, where we continue to explore the journeys and the ideas of some of the world's most innovative thinkers and creators. And today we're traveling to New York, and my guest is Gene S. Jones, the nationally acclaimed. He was a game show host, a creativity coach. Now he's the author of inspirational books. Gene, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And I say welcome back. Gene was one of my first handful of guests on the podcast, going back almost 4 years. Gene, I can't believe it's been that long.
Time flies, but at the same time, every day is an adventure.
There you go. We're going to talk about one of Gene's current projects, but he's got a great career spanning, let's see, fire eating, juggling, magic, sports broadcasting, a game show host. You've done a lot of creative things, Gene. And now your latest book, Consolidated Wisdom. I guess the idea of consolidating not only wisdom from past thinkers, but wisdom from your own creative journey.
This book, I decided to focus on the greatest minds of history, and I left myself out of this book for a particular reason. I didn't want to be presumptuous about myself. And my next book is going to be called Modern Wisdom. In fact, it's in production right now for release next year, and that will be only my own personal wisdom quotes. I decided it was best to separate the two.
Mm-hmm. These quotes, when you say you've curated these quotes, we're talking about 5,000 years worth of wisdom and insights from all the great thinkers.
It is. And the way it came about actually is from my game show, because in the game show, I used to like to use famous quotes and see if people knew who quoted them, or maybe I would say half of the quote and see if anyone could finish it. So it became a regular thing in my game shows. I'd say probably use 2 quotes per show, and I did over 2,500 shows. So what happened was during the pandemic, when there was a hiatus in performing, I looked over the file of quotes that I had from all the game shows, and I started to think, wow, this would really make an interesting book. So I started what became a 3-year research project to find even more quotes and organize them in a particular way that made them easy for people to access.
Mm-hmm. Let's dive into a little bit of that creative process then. I mean, I can imagine cards, printouts, napkins, everything spread out with all these quotes, and somehow you got them down, funneled them down to only 1,500.
That's really the challenge in today's world. It's not that there's not enough quotes, is that there's too many quotes. For instance, if one goes to see quotes by Abe Lincoln online, they may find 500 quotes by Abe Lincoln, of which maybe 3 or 4 are real gems. There's a number of others that are good, and then some of them are just kind of pedestrian. So really the big job for me was sorting and going through it almost like a gold miner mining for gold back in the gold rush days of the 19th century.
And many people have often quoted some of these people, but sometimes we find they've been misquoted. How were you able to verify whether these quotes could really be attributed to these people?
Whenever there was a question, I would go to multiple sources and I would sometimes find a discrepancy. And if there was a discrepancy, I just didn't use the quote. And then there were a couple where there was a discrepancy, and it was so interesting that I actually put the discrepancy in the book. So in other words, I would say, well, if someone said so-and-so said it, but other people said so-and-so said it. And really, and there's one quoted that I just thought was so interesting. It was attributed to Ernest Hemingway, only it turned out the quote had been used before he was born. So therefore, obviously, even though the public would say, oh, that's a Hemingway quote, he couldn't have done it first. So obviously he liked the quote, used it, and never said where it came from.
Sure. And so the second word in the title, wisdom. So you've consolidated all these quotes, but now you're really trying to evaluate or judge them for the wisdom, the impact that they could have on individuals, businesses, daily life in general. So instead of just saying, isn't that interesting? You tried to look at it as what could we learn from this or what wisdom could we derive?
Hopefully, the hope is in putting this together is that people can a- acquire more wisdom by reading these quotes, and everyone will read different quotes for different reasons. So what I did was and I think this was one of the other challenges of the book really was how do you organize all this information? So I did it by category. So for instance, if you're interested in business, there's a business chapter with quotes. If you're interested in science, there's a science chapter. If you're interested in spirituality or sports or theater or the arts, there's chapters specifically organized for each one of those genres. So people don't have to read this book from cover to cover. They can literally go to the table of contents and go to the area or the arena that they're interested in. And then because there's such interconnections between wisdoms, at the end of each chapter, I have what I have wisdom trails, which if you're interested in the quotes in this chapter, I suggest you go to look at this chapter. And sometimes even specific people and pages and quotes are enumerated so people can go specifically from one place to another to continue with their interests. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of overlap between sports and business and the arts because quotes from sports many times are leadership quotes, which are really business oriented. And then many times they're artistic quotes, which would be for the arts. So I kind of show people the different ways to keep on going with their wisdom search.
And connect those ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could because that was to me the real learning part of doing this book and the research because I read over 150 books and I probably spent over 10,000 hours researching all these things and organizing them. But I learned that there's such a connection between everything in life. It's really surprising. And it's not some kind of out there kind of concept. It's just very clear when you start studying the wisdom traditions of the world throughout history. Not only are they interconnected, but humanity is dealing with many of the same problems now that they were dealing with 5,000 years ago. And
Mm.
to me, that was very interesting.
No question about it. This evolution of this human thought over thousands of years. What were some of the insights you discovered as you saw these connected ideas? And you said, wow, this quote could have been from yesterday, and yet it was from hundreds of years ago.
I think that's what's so interesting. And that caused me to start studying the history of the times. Actually, accompanying each quote will be the name of the person, the years that they were alive, and then a brief biography of them, which also sometimes describes the historical context of their lives. So, what was going on during this person's life that they said this? Maybe there was a war going on, there was a revolution going on, there was the industrial revolution as opposed to an armed revolution. So there have been all kinds of different periods in history that had specific things going on. And then you start to see the parallels between the different ages and the way thought evolved. And really, it's more that our language has changed than our own emotional basis has changed. So what I'm saying is the same thought that was written in, say, 1000 BC would have a different way of saying it than we say it now. So that's also something that I found interesting is the different ways that people can express similar ideas.
Yes. I'm talking with Gene Jones, the author of a new book, Consolidated Wisdom. Gene, maybe we can drill down and focus in a bit on creativity, since that's our theme. And you have a collection and a chapter on creativity. Perhaps you could share with us a couple of either quotes or ideas or themes from that chapter.
The one that's most popular is from Steve Jobs. Creativity is just connecting things. And it sounds very simplistic, but when you start thinking about connecting things, you start realizing that's at the heart of innovation because innovation is taking things that are known and combining them in new ways to formulate something new. So that's how you say is different than an invention where you actually create something that was never there. So, innovation, there's a quote from Roone Arledge, of all people, who used to produce ABC Wide World of Sports and many other things for television. And he said, innovate or die. And he was talking about the fact that businesses need to innovate or they're going to perish because other people will pass them by. But some of the other quotes about creativity is when you're brainstorming, you have to accept wild ideas. And that comes from Jeff Bezos. And
Mm.
that gets to the heart of brainstorming, which is the initial phase of the creative process where you take all ideas and all thoughts and just don't judge them. Just put them on a blackboard or on a piece of paper so you can look at them all before you start to focus or evaluate. And that's really a very important part of the creative process is to have the freedom and the openness to look at everything, even the ones that sound crazy, because many times out of some crazy idea, a brilliant idea comes.
Mhm. I love just in those 3 how those dots might connect. Obviously, Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, sort of the technology and innovators of our time. But then you throw Roone Arledge in there. He didn't invent football. He didn't invent sportcasters. Howard Cosell had a job before Monday Night Football. But when he put that on the map, that was innovative. That was creative.
Exactly. Now, there's a couple of other quotes, and this one's very important to me also. This one's by Edwin Land. Now, people will say, who's that? Edwin Land invented the Land camera. That's the basis for Kodak. He was the person that started Kodak cameras, which have faded out from our consciousness now, but for over 100 years was the go-to place for cameras and pictures and photos. And he said an essential part of creativity is not being afraid to fail. And that's also very important. Once again, giving yourself the freedom to experiment and not worrying about the fact maybe this will fail because I'll learn something from my failure. And the only real loss in failure is if it makes you give up. So if you don't give up, failure is just another step towards success.
So good. I think about the putting these ideas into action. Gene, in addition to your books, you've hosted thousands of game shows, but also lots of other creative projects. You've also taught creativity seminars. How would you guide people to apply some of these things to really unlock their creative potential?
I'll give you one more quote from my creativity chapter, which also comes from a very interesting man named Wim Hof. He's known as the Iceman because he is able to sustain activities during frigid temperatures. He's actually world famous. Anyone that wants to see who the Iceman is or Wim Hof, Hof, look him up on the internet. It's fascinating. And he said the limit is not the sky, the limit is the mind. So you have to realize that if you make your mind limitless, you can do almost anything. And to me, the impossible is just to accomplish the impossible. You just have to break it down into little steps that are possible because that gets you to where you want to go. And for me, the creative process really starts with how you approach things mentally. And I have this 9 pillars that I've designed in retrospect, looking back on my life that I used unknowingly at the time. What were the traits that I used or that I took part with to get to be creative all the time? And when I say creative all the time, to establish a consistent creative flow in my life to see where things might take me. And the first one is freedom. And the second one is openness. And then there's flexibility. And then there's passion and curiosity. And what I call vocabulary, which is the lexicon of all the resources available to you. And to know what they are, you need peripheral vision. And then to have faith to keep you going even in rough times. And the ninth one was collegiality, which is kind of collaboration with others.
Hmm. And I go back to your don't quit resilience message. In a project as large as Consolidated Wisdom, the book must have been, were there days that you didn't want to do it, that you said, this is too much, I think I'll give up? And what made you get over that hump?
There never was a day like that, I have to admit, because go back to the 9 pillars, passion. If you're passionate enough about something, it just there's like this fire. I call it brain burn for myself. When my brain starts to burn on something, I can't stop till it's done. It's got to get finished. And I got to figure it out if it's a problem, whatever it is. And that brain burn just, it's like a fire in my head. I can't sleep. I can't eat without having a notepad next to me. I do sleep and I do eat. But what I'm saying is, no matter what I'm doing, that project is burning in my mind at all times and things are happening. Brain cells are firing, whatever goes on technically in the brain, physiologically, there's always something going on that's dedicated to that project. And this project was such a labor of love and so totally immersive for me that it just was probably the greatest learning experience of my life. It enriched my life to experience all these quotes, to study the history and context of the times, and to just absorb the wisdom. It was just really that kind of a wonderful experience. So
Mhm.
I'm delighted to share with others at this point.
So good. Thanks for sharing that. And as I'm listening, I find the mental, the wisdom, the thinking, the brain, all of these brain powered type concepts. So it's no wonder that you have some chapters, I think, at the end of the book called Wisdom Meditation, where you're really taking these mindfulness and thinking processes and focusing them on a method that has helped you and perhaps is helping other readers.
It's interesting because that goes back actually to my game show once again. Because as a game show host, I often was called upon to do custom shows for corporations where information about the corporations became the essential part of the game show. Sometimes the whole show, most of the times part of the show. But in so doing, I became a participant in their brainstorming sessions many times. So I really became a student of and a participant and leader of brainstorming sessions. So out of that brainstorming knowledge, I created what I call auto brainstorming. That's the wisdom meditation is an auto brainstorm kind of technique. So it's actually teaching people how to brainstorm with themselves as opposed to needing other people. And in so doing, in this meditation and using the quotes, any quotes they choose from the book, they can actually apply it to whatever problem or issue or challenge they're dealing with. So it's really intended to help people make better decisions and improve their life. And that I'll make that point. My concept of life is that the more wisdom you have, the better decisions you'll make. And the better decisions you make, the better your life will be. So that's the progression of logic that caused me to want to put this book out to the public, to help them make better decisions and live a better life. It's nothing that I'm insisting on. It's just I'm trying to give the world another tool to improve.
Very good. Listeners, that's worth underscoring this idea of better thoughts and better outcomes and better ideas. Maybe hit that rewind button a couple times and go back about 30 seconds to a minute and listen to what Gene says one more time, because that's really a big takeaway that you can get from this show. Gene, yeah, you're just now wrapping up Consolidated Wisdom. You said you have another book coming out very soon. Tell us about that again and future projects you might be working on.
These books really, they're not things that I thought of overnight in terms of where they started from. I've been collecting wisdom quotes for more than 35 years, but I've also been writing my own little wisdom quotes for more longer than that, actually, since I was in college when I started writing poetry and studied creative writing as a freshman in college. So what happened when I did this book was, as I unearthed all the quotes that I had from others, I started finding all these quotes that I had from myself. And you mentioned napkins and all kinds of paper paraphernalia, paper bags that have been torn up with little sayings on them. I
Right.
had this box full of this stuff. And so I said, when I get done with Consolidated Wisdom, I think I'm going to try and organize my own personal quotes. So that while it was a parallel project, while I was doing Consolidated Wisdom, there were days where I would take a little time and start putting my own quotes into my computer. And that has evolved into a book of over 200 pages that I'm calling Modern Wisdom. and it's already in design. We have a cover, and we're working on the layout and how it's going to be presented right now. And so it's scheduled for publication sometime probably by March of 2025.
Very exciting. Yes, we can all creative listeners can picture those ripped up napkins and bags and notepads and everything else we collect and capture our ideas on. We can imagine it.
Let me make a suggestion to your listeners since the theme of this show is creativity. There's something I call the daily download that I would encourage people to start trying to do if they don't do it already. And this is not a journal. This is like whatever's on your mind before you go to bed, write it down. Whatever's on your mind when you wake up, write it down. And the reason I say write it down is because the process of trying to remember these things takes up space in your mind that might be used for the next creative idea. So the whole idea is to clear, and I am a student of feng shui, which is, has to do with the art of clearing space to make room for new things to come in. And this is one little aspect of that I really have found helpful in my life is to always write things down so my mind doesn't waste space trying to retain them.
So good. And you call that the daily download.
That's what I call it for myself. Yes.
So good. Listeners, if nothing else, you've taken away a great technique, but we've been talking about all sorts of ways to put your creativity in action that it really evolves from all the great thinkers. And Gene has consolidated all this great wisdom in his book, Consolidated Wisdom, and there's more to come. Gene, can't thank you enough for sharing your incredible journey with us.
It's a pleasure.
So good. And listeners, you can connect with Gene at
It's Gene Jones Wisdom.
Jones, and we'll have that link in the show notes, so we'll be able to find that right off. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We're continuing our around the world journeys to talk to creative practitioners everywhere about how they get inspired and how we organize ideas, as we've heard today, but ultimately how we gain the confidence and make the connections to launch our work out into the world. And that's what our show is really all about. I want to thank Gene, but I also want to thank our sponsor, White Cloud Coffee Roasters. You can enjoy 10% discount on your next coffee order when you use the code CREATIVITY at checkout when you go to whitecloudcoffee.com. So until next time, keep creating, keep sharing your world of creativity, and we'll keep unlocking your world of creativity. We'll see you next time.